The vast white beauty of the season of winter reaches gracefully toward the sleeping mountains, and there, in the beauty of its flowing crystal sculptures, we miss seeing the simple presence of color. Even our warm, wild creatures know it's not easy finding green under a blanket of snow, but it's nice to have a friend to help you look. It is in this season of winter that we celebrate the Bethlehem birth of the child Jesus. Bishop Sheen says, "It was a breakthrough in time that changed our world, for we found a belief that is the love of the truth."
Unbelief is dread of the truth about ourselves. That's unbelief. Faith is a willingness to face the truth about ourselves, and when we do, well, once that original dread is overcome and we admit the breakthrough, then we're changed, and then our mind is illumined, our will is strengthened, we have a great joy and happiness.
She's lovely, isn't she? Beautiful. Hi there. I'm Cameron Mitchell, and I want to wish happy holidays to all of you. Christmas is our time of love and goodwill, a moment in the portrait of history when a bright silver star high in the night sky gave off a close and holy light, and the world in solemn stillness lay to hear the angels sing. Christmas is also a time of giving, and we've wrapped up a special present just for you, filled with hugs, kisses, joy, hope, and sunshine. It's a Christmas gift of love from a friend of yours, Fulton J. Sheen. He calls it Superman and Christmas, a unique comparison of fantasy and truth, a breakthrough in history, blessed by the birth of a child of grace, peace, and love.
Friends, a mother told her little boy to go into the parlor and turn on television. He was distracting the mother. And he turned the dial, and he caught a picture of me on television. He ran out, said to his mother, "Ma, Superman." Well, here is Superman in a new costume with even a new title tonight, Superman and Christmas. What has Superman got to do with Christmas? You know what Superman does, Batman. And then these men, we have from other planets. Isn't it interesting how many of those we have in our world today who, first of all, seem to come from somewhere else, just as Superman does. And quickly he changes his costume. He goes into a telephone booth or a closet, just as an ordinary mortal, and he puts on the form and the habit of Superman. And then once he's broke through with this great power of his, then he begins to do wonders. He relieves us in our afflictions, helps damsels in distress, defends those who have been persecuted, lover of the poor and the socially disinherited. And this intensely pleases the American people. Why is it that programs of this kind are so popular? I think there's a subconscious reason, almost an unconscious one. First of all, we know that the help that we need is not just among us ordinary mortals and the affairs of daily life. If we are to have the inner strength that we need, it has to come from outside. We've never expressed this, perhaps in so many words, but we know the need of it. And Superman, Batman, and men from other worlds, they satisfy our needs, at least from the point of view of imagination. They give us what we lack. We know that of and by ourselves we are not enough. Just as the music that we love is the music we already have in our own hearts, so too the amusements that we like are the unconscious expressions of hidden desires. Superman is the desire for Christmas. It should not be hard for our generation to understand Christmas. Now I'm going to show you how Superman and Christmas are somewhat alike. I really didn't need to use this blackboard tonight, but I'm going to use it just for this one illustration so my angel can clean it. It would be terrible to have a Christmas show and not use my angel. The Superman comes from outside. There's a kind of a breakthrough. Is that clear? Oh yes, it gets clearer, doesn't it? As you're right. This is unusual chalk. Invisible chalk. First, there's a breakthrough. And then, because he helps others, there is a kind of a renovation, a strengthening, an aiding. Now, Christmas is just this. First, there is a breakthrough. And instead of someone going into a closet and taking on the form and the substance of a Superman, the breakthrough this time is the God coming down to earth, breaking through time, splitting it so much so that from that time on to this, it's BC and AD. But there's this difference from Superman, and this is very important. Superman goes from weakness to power. The breakthrough of Christmas is from power to weakness. You saw the picture of the crib when the show began. Here is infinity and littleness. See, this isn't a man getting strong. This is a God becoming weak. He who made the world is in the world, even rejected by it. He who made the nest is nestled therein. The tiny little hands that are not quite long enough to reach the huge heads of the cattle are the hands that hold the reins, that steer the sun and moon and stars in their courses. He's wrapped in swaddling bands. Divinity, enclosed, wrapped, confined, cabin, cribbed, helpless as a babe. What a difference between Superman and this breakthrough. Not a manifestation of power to please the pride of man, but humility, to humble man's pride. This idea of a God becoming a man that you saw there in the crib is something that's very hard for us to realize. Just suppose you love dogs, and you were sorrowful for the way dogs were treated by some masters or neglected. And you had the power to dispossess yourself of your body. But you could do with your soul what you wanted. And you took that soul of yours and you put it into the body of a dog. And when you did that, you would resolve, but rarely to exceed the limitations of that dog organism. What a humiliation that would be. You know that you had a mind that could write poetry and that could study science and absorb literature and understand Dante and Aquinas, and yet here you were in the body of a dog. And then there would be another humiliation. And that other humiliation would be, because you went into the organism of a dog, you would have to associate with other dogs, knowing all the while that you were better, that you were a man. You think it humbling to become a dog just simply to give dogs examples of good conduct? Well, what do you think it is for this breakthrough? Not going into a closet, but going into a stable and a crib. Being bound with swaddling bands. That's the difference in the Superman. Weakness instead of power. And then the other difference is that Superman, when he comes to this earth of ours to do his wonders, only touches the environment. He touches what is outside of man. In other words, I've never seen chalk like that before. Angel, where did you get it? You've got to wait for an effect. It's like telling a funny story. It just doesn't happen all at once. All the Superman does is to change circumstances on the outside. But he does not touch man on the inside. That's the difference. And when God becomes man, when we have Christmas, he leaves circumstances very much the way they are. He leaves Roman soldiers parading through the streets. The same problems. Pain and suffering and hunger and so forth. But he begins reforming the hearts of men. And once they are reformed, then if they live according to his way, then they'll do away with these boring things of indigence and suffering. So the God-man works in the heart of a man. It's very much as if, now I wonder if my angel will use an invisible eraser. Now, this internal operation of God when he comes to this earth may be likened to a plague. Suppose that there was something in the world today like the Black Death during the Middle Ages. Remember, that wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe? And suppose a great scientist found a remedy for that plague. And he made the remedy available to the whole human race. There would be some who would come to be relieved. Others might not. Now that's just exactly what happened when God came to this earth. We're all willing to have our circumstances changed. We like to have more money. Maybe live in a different house. But do we want our thinking changed? We want our loves changed? And the God-man who came to this earth came for the remedy for moral and spiritual plagues. Came to make us happy on the inside. Not everyone wants it. He came into his own, and his own received him not. Now this is Christmas in terms of the Superman. Now let me reduce it to a concrete case. The breakthrough, how he operates through what we call his grace. It means an illumination of the intellect and a strengthening of character. I did a great deal of work in my life in Soho Square district of London, which is the international area of London. And in one church there, because I was an American, I had to get up early and read the first Mass. The English sleep late. Well, this was Christmas morning. Christmas. And that night there had been a heavy London fog. Believe me, our smogs here in New York are nothing compared to the fog of London. When I opened the door, a limp figure fell in. It was a young woman. She'd been asleep against the door. It was almost frozen. And I said, how did you happen to be here? She said, I don't know, Father. I said, oh, Father? Yes, she said, I used to be a Catholic, but not anymore. I said, how did you happen to be here? Well, she said, I don't know, I was a bit drunk. Well, I said, men often drink because they like the stuff, and women drink because they don't like something else. What didn't you like? Well, she said, I didn't like the three men, she says, that I was going with, and they were beginning to find it out. I was playing false to them. So I got drunk. What is your name? She told me her name, pointing to a billboard on the Cross and Blackwell Jam office building across the way. I said, is that your picture there? Yes, she says, I'm the leading lady in that musical comedy. Well, I went in and made her a cup of coffee, and I said, come back now this afternoon. And she said, I will come back on one condition. That you don't ask me to go to confession. I said, all right. She said, I want you to promise me faithfully that you will not ask me to go to confession. I said, I promise you faithfully not to ask you to go to confession. So she came back that afternoon before matinee, and I said, we have a Rembrandt and a Van Dyck in this church. Would you like to see them? She said, yes. So as we walked down the side aisle, we passed the confessional box. I pushed her in. I didn't ask her to go. I always keep my promises. Well, she went to communion. She was there month after month, and then she became a nun in London. And she's still living as a nun. Now here you see the breakthrough. Not the breakthrough into a crib, but the breakthrough, well, into a stable, a heart that's a stable. And then when the breakthrough happened, there was a change, a renovation of heart and character, so that she was no longer what she was before. It was not the outside that was changed, it was the inside. Now, that's what Christmas is. Christmas is not just something that has happened, it's something that is happening. And some of us, we're afraid of it. It's very much like people go through life not knowing they have cancer. They're unhappy, they're sick, they're a bit miserable, but they don't know why. If a doctor tells them that they have cancer, then their whole attitude toward life changes. They may be even able eventually to find a remedy. So people stay away from this babe of Christmas. They stay away from Christ. They're a bit afraid. Unbelief is dread of the truth about ourselves. That's unbelief. Faith is a willingness to face the truth about ourselves. And when we do, well, once that original dread is overcome and we admit the breakthrough, then we're changed. And then our mind is illumined, our will is strengthened, we have a great joy and happiness. So I say, therefore, it's hard for some people to accept Christmas. But I'm going to give you a tip, because I'm talking to everybody. I always do on television. If you do not want to start there, in that stable, with the full recognition of that breakthrough, I will tell you where to start. Start loving your fellow man. Start loving your neighbor. And begin to love him, not just because of what he can do for you, or because of any pleasure anyone gives you, but just love him as a fellow man, and then eventually you begin to see that he's a creature of God. The only unhappy people in this world are the people who are selfish. And I have known in this world some people who just loved humanity. Won't you begin to love really and truly? Please do that for me, and you'll eventually come to know the true meaning of Christmas. Then you'll have a Merry Christmas.
Happy Christmas, Bishop Sheen. Happy Christmas. In your presence, there is a benediction and a grace. In your memory, we have lit the candles of fellowship and hope, knowing that our experiences of unity in human relationships are more compelling than the concepts, fears, and prejudices which divide us. These tiny flames must burn in our hearts all year long. Happy Christmas, Bishop Sheen.
Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
Friends, perhaps the best way to introduce this story, or this subject of false compassion, is to tell you about a little girl who hurt her finger, began to bleed slightly, and she went in to see her mother, and her mother bound it up. And then she went up to see her daddy, who was working. And she came down crying. The mother said, "Why are you crying?" Well, she said, "I told Daddy that I hurt my finger, and he didn't even say, 'Oh.'" That was just a want of compassion. Compassion is a sympathy, a pity, an ability to be wounded when others are wounded, and to feel the sores of others as one's own. That is compassion. There's always been compassion in the world, and the right kind. We will distinguish later on between the right and wrong kind. Even the old Greek historian Herodotus, who lived several centuries before Christ, tells that he was shipwrecked once on an island, and the people came out and cared for him, built fires and fed him. We know of the compassion, and kindness, and sympathy of the Muslims. They will even kill sometimes their last lamb for a visitor. Then there was the story, it's only a legend, I suppose, about Abraham. One day a visitor came to Abraham's tent, and Abraham killed a lamb, gave him the best bed, showed him every courtesy and kindness, and yet nothing pleased the visitor. He didn't like the food, he didn't like the lamb, he didn't like his bed, he didn't like the tent. And finally Abraham threw him out. And God said to Abraham, "Listen, Abraham, I've been putting up with that man for 40 years. Can't you put up with him for 3 days?" Of course, the classic story of all compassion is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it is interesting how that parable began and how it was occasioned. A very clever lawyer came to visit our blessed Lord and said, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now the lawyer wanted an argument. Lawyers like arguments. And our blessed Lord, in answer to his question, asked a question. Sometimes it's well, not always to be put on the defensive with a question. Ask another. And so, when our blessed Lord was asked the question, he said, "Well, what do you read in the law?" And he quoted the law. Love God with your whole mind and heart and soul, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And our blessed Lord said to him, "Well, do this and you will live." Well, he didn't want that kind of an answer. And so he introduced a rather technical question. It seems practical, but he meant it to be technical. Namely, who is my neighbor? How do you define him? And then our blessed Lord told the story of a man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And you do go down. As a matter of fact, the distance between the two places is about 2,400 feet. I mean the descent. And he was waylaid by robbers and beaten. And a priest and a Levite passed by. They had no compassion for the wounded man. That was not too great a tribute for the priest and the Levite. One explanation that is given is that they found the man already robbed. Maybe, who knows? It could happen. And then a man who was a stranger and an alien, namely the Good Samaritan, passed by and brought him to the inn and then offered to return and pay all expenses. And so our blessed Lord said, now who's the neighbor? Well, the lawyer said it's the one who showed compassion. And our Lord said, that's right. Now do this and you will live. So there's always been a right kind of compassion, and it manifests itself in various ways. It can be physical, it can be financial, it can be moral. Financial compassion would be helping the poor. And this really happened to me the other day going to my office. Some tramp came up to him and he said, would you give me $31 for a cup of coffee? And I gave him $1, and then it suddenly dawned on me, $31. I said, why do you want $31? I said, a coffee, a breakfast will only cost you $1. Why do you want the 30? You know what he told me? He said, you wouldn't want me to go into a restaurant dressed in this suit, would you? Well, at that point, the priest passed him by. Then there's also a physical compassion, too. You probably have often seen the picture of a boy that's carrying another boy on his back, and someone said, isn't he too heavy? No. He said, he's my brother. Then there's moral compassion. Suppose a judge sentences a man to death and then says to the criminal, I will take the sentence. I will be hanged for you. Well, that in some way typifies the great moral compassion of God coming down to this earth and taking upon himself our sins and dying for us. Now, compassion always implies what? It always implies a moral order. Namely, a distinction between right and wrong. Between the man who was waylaid on the road and the robbers and the thieves who beat him up. And compassion also implies that there's a distinction between a man destroying himself through his own fault and being destroyed by others. That's true compassion. Now, what is false? And this is what we're in today. False compassion. False compassion, which is gradually growing in this country, is a pity that is shown not to the mugged, but to the mugger. Not to the family of the murdered, but to the murderer. Not to the woman who was raped, but to the rapist. Not to the poor girl who's given a shot of dope, but to the rich boy who happens to come from a fine family. There are some judges, some in some of our courts. There are some social workers, not all. There are sob sisters. There are the social slobberers who insist on compassion being shown to the muggers, to the dope fiends, to the throat slashers, to the beatniks, to the prostitutes, to the homosexuals, to the punks. So that today the decent man is practically off the reservation. This is the false compassion. How did it start? It started in literature. In the novels of William Saroyan, John Steinbeck, where pity was extended through the novel to the good-natured slob. Then the novels of Mandel, James Jones, and others, in which pity is shown to every kind of pervert and degenerate. As one character says in the novel, the girl said, "He called me a tramp." Imagine that, he called me a tramp. And the other girl says, "I don't understand it. Just because you go out and do all the things that a tramp does, and steal and so forth, doesn't mean that you're really not a nice, fine girl." Now, with what result? With the result that crime is increasing, that clemency of a false kind is shown to criminals, and we have this crime picture in the United States. There is a robbery in the United States every 30 seconds. There is an auto stolen every minute. There is a rape every 3 minutes. There is a murder in the United States every 60 minutes. "43% of those who have been arrested for robbery and larceny have already received clemency in courts through false compassion." In New York City alone, there are 60,000 narcotic addicts. I do not know how many there are in the United States, but here's the national figure. Of all of those that are arrested for dope pushing, selling, taking narcotics, 37% are released. They are not guilty, they're just sick, that's all, just sick. And most of those are brought back then for more crime, because they've committed greater crimes. "40% of the property damage in the United States is committed by youths between the age of 10 and 17 years. What happens to policemen who are trying to defend justice? 12 out of every 100 policemen in the United States are assaulted in the line of duty. Why assaulted? Is there respect for authority? Or is there pity for the dope pusher, for the thief, for the young mugger who murders an 80-year-old woman for 15 cents? Part of the blame for this crime picture has to be laid at the door of all of those who have committed and shown false compassion. Here, for example, a young married woman with 2 children goes on a kind of binge and lives with 5 different men for 5 different months. She's brought before a judge who finds that her good husband, a science teacher, was not sufficiently humanistic because he taught science. I never knew before that that destroyed human nature. But he was considered by the judge not sufficiently humanistic. So the judge ordered that the house in which they lived should be given to this mother, that the two children should be cared for by the state. The husband should pay her $200 a month until she was emotionally restored, because she was more to be pitied than censured. This is the false compassion. There was a professor in one of our universities here in the United States who had just finished a lecture on the fact that there's no such thing as right and wrong. We are only sick. And the great clemency must always be shown to every kind of criminal. On his way home from giving that lecture, he was mugged, robbed, and badly beaten. He insisted on being taken to the police station before he was taken to the hospital in order to complain against the police. That was the hard way to learn. But why this false compassion? Well, we say simply because we've broken down the standards of right and wrong. Reduced everything to a malady and a disease. That after all, if I say that the time, let us say, is 10 minutes to 8, and you say, no, it's 10 minutes to 12, well, all right, who's going to decide? You mean to say we got to have something outside of our clocks to decide what is the right time? Suppose you go into a store and say that a yard means 23 inches. Someone else says, no, it's 24. Another is 36. There's no standard outside of all of you? Who's going to decide what is right? As the great Russian thinker of the last century said, a day is coming when people will say there's no longer any right, no longer any wrong, there's only hunger, and men will come crying and fawning at our feet, saying, give us bread. In other words, it's just the economic that matters. Nothing else. Even youth is saying, many who are arrested today will say, well, no, I gave up alcohol because there was no kick in it. I went in for dope because there was more kick. What will be the next step? What will it be? Because remember that our reactions, emotional reactions, always decrease. For example, if I did this all the time I was talking to you, you would notice it, but if I did it for 25 minutes, you'd get used to it. In order to make it noticeable, I would have to do that. So it is with sensations. We always have to increase the stimulus in order to get a similar reaction. Now, if we're going to give up, if youths are going to give up, say, alcohol because there's no kick in it, then go in for dope, what's next? There is latent in our society a grave danger that we may go in for a kind of masochism and cruelty. In the distant future, there could be such a thing even as persecution of some social or religious class. But I think there will be a step before that. I think that we in America will revive bullfighting. And I think we'll get new kicks out of mugging bulls. That'll be the next step. What's to be done to stop this false compassion? Well, one thing that might be done is we might institute kind of conservation corps for the hardened youths and put them under a tough Marine sergeant, where they will be paid for learning a craft. And then afterwards, when they have been reformed through some kind of discipline and also through education, put out into industry. Another is by establishing throughout the country serious volunteer workers. That is to say, those who will take care of the youths who are brought into court, have an interest in them. This is already working out all over the world. It's worked out in Vienna, so much so that in Vienna, where they have houses, 24 boys living in each house, and a volunteer worker at the head of each house. One boy had reformed himself from alcoholism, and then when he was out, he went to his father, who was an alcoholic, and his father said to him, said to the volunteer worker who rejuvenated this delinquent, he said, "You've ruined my son. He's no longer an alcoholic." The volunteer workers who take this job seriously have had great success. In one state in our union, only 37 out of 379 cases failed to restore youth. And in another, in Vienna, 92% of the cases were successful. Simply because they were given a mission, a job, something to do. We have perhaps even ought to reform our child labor law. Young people are not allowed to work on account of the law. They're old enough to work. They're old enough to commit crime. They do not want to go to school. We assume in the United States that everybody must go to school. I mean, even go to college, so that college today is, instead of an intellectual privilege, it's becoming a kind of a social necessity. You have to go. But some of them are not made for books. Let them learn crafts. When, for example, there was a newspaper strike in one city, a number of boys who were delinquents began selling newspapers. It was a delivery strike, and they sold newspapers. Crime dropped. The time of the blackout in New York some time ago, the youths went out and directed traffic, proved themselves worthwhile. Why? They had a job, they had a mission. And this is what we have to do, to recognize responsibility. Give them a mission, a scope, a plan in life, and restore into our society true compassion, where we make a distinction between the sin and the sinner, as did the good Lord, where we will hate the sin, condemn it, and love the sinner. And with this compassion, we can hear once again the words, "Do this, and you will live." Here in the studio, there are cameras at various angles for the audience to see. And though these telecasts are all in color, they have not been reproduced in color, always in the station. So it was quite an unusual experience to find that we were in color here in the studio, so we could see ourselves. What does one do then with the old black and white? That's what I was thinking about. And there immediately came to my mind the story of a man who was an expert in throwing a boomerang. And he could throw that boomerang around a house, it would come back to him. He could throw it around a tree 3 or 4 times, it would come back to him. And a friend saw him and said that he ought to have a really good new boomerang. So he sent to Australia and got a new boomerang inlaid with pearl. And he gave it to the expert. 6 months later, he came back to see how the expert was getting on with his new boomerang. And his wife said, "He isn't here anymore. He's in a mental hospital." Yes, what happened? He went crazy trying to throw away the old boomerang. We're going crazy in this studio trying to throw away the old black and white. My angel is naturally always flying. But do you know that for a little relaxation, he decided a week ago to take a sea voyage? And there was a terrible storm. And almost everybody in the whole ship was seasick. And a young woman was just getting ready for bed, and she was taken very seasick. And she ran out down the corridor to the bathroom, and the angel, I don't know where an angel gets seasick, but at any rate, my angel did get seasick, and so he dashed out of his room, seasick as he could be. His wings were down, and he bumped into this girl, and oh, she was so ashamed and abashed. He says, "All right, lady, I'll never live to tell the story." Why did we choose to talk about laughter and humor today? Because really there's a tremendous amount of gloom in the world. Did you know that there is a book entitled Gloom in Modern Literature? One finds it in the novels like one of John Steinbeck's novel, Kathy, who burned her parents, did everything that was evil, very serious play. Many of the dramas that you see today on Broadway are gloomy things. Architecture's gloomy. There's no decoration, nothing to relieve a straight line. The songs of the young are gloomy. Imagine a 15, 16-year-old boy and girl singing songs about how their heart is already broken. They're ready to die. But you have to say die 15 times. Die, 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 die. They're ready to die with gloom. But principally, there's no satire. That, I think, proves our over-seriousness. You cannot satirize an Irishman, you can't give a brogue, can't imitate a Jew, can't imitate Negro dialect, can't tell jokes about Italians, can't tell jokes about Poles, can't tell jokes about Catholics, can't tell jokes about Protestants. Really, we're a serious people. And when this world is the only world there is, believe me, we got to be serious. It's like a child that's got a ball and he's told this is the only thing you're ever going to have during life. He can't play with it too much. But if he's told, well, later on you're going to have another one that'll never wear out and always give you great pleasure, oh, you can have fun with this one. So, because there's so much gloom, we're going to say something about laughter. Now, you never meet laughter in the universe until you meet man. Man is the only joker in the deck of nature. Hyenas have their mouths open, but they do not really laugh. And animals are funny only when they imitate a man. The reason monkeys are funny is because they look like us. Cow isn't funny. A cow doesn't look like us. Dogs are funny when they sit up and beg, because we beg. I had a dog that I once trained to say his prayers, and he would put his head between his paws and wouldn't move until I said amen. Well, that was funny because he imitated a man. Then I also taught him, I would give him candy or meat, anything that he liked, and say, Lent, fast. And he wouldn't touch it until I said Easter. Now, why is it that you do not meet laughter until you meet man? I once gave a telecast on another side of laughter, but here I'm going to discuss it in relationship to gloom in the universe today. But why is it that man alone begins laughter in the universe? The reason is very simple. Man belongs to two worlds. He has a divine image. And then he belongs to this animal world of ours, like an animal. Now, when you belong to two worlds, you've got really an opportunity for humor, for laughter. And the laughter begins whenever man begins to degrade slightly this divine image. Whenever there's a falling off from dignity, not the destruction of dignity. Oh, no. For example, death is not funny, because that's the complete destruction. But where there is a decrease of value in man, then there's laughter. Now, let's just take some simple examples. We often see men walking down the street with the hat on the side of the head. We don't laugh at them. Did you ever see a bishop's mitre? It's a great big high hat, pointed to the top. This is the yarmulke. This is not a mitre. But if I one Sunday wore my mitre on the side of my head like that, I know a bishop who wears his that way because he's bald in front. Well, that's funny, see? Because this is a slight degradation of the divine image. So the straw hat on a man that walks down Broadway is not funny, but a mitre cocked on the side of my head is very funny. Take, for example, a dog running down the street is not funny. But a dog in church is very funny. Any animal in church. Why? Simply because here there's a kind of an elevation out of the animal kingdom up to the divine. It's a kind of a simulation, an attempt to almost become divine, and so it becomes very funny. I heard of one priest who had a dog, and the dog came wandering around the altar, and he was saying Mass, and he gave it a kick so he turned around and said, "Lord be with you," and he missed the dog, and he said, "I'll get you at the pray, brethren." Today we see a lot of running and jogging. Running isn't funny. But if you see a man running after a woman, it's very funny. Take, for example, a fall. We see chimneys fall. We see leaves fall. We see many things that imitate the law, follow the law of gravitation. But they're never funny. But if a man falls, that's really funny, particularly if he considers himself very dignified. And maybe there's a profound theological significance in this. Perhaps it is related to original sin, the fall of man, which wasn't so funny in the beginning, but now is. And because man is at this borderline of the divine and the animal, we never laugh at his strength. We laugh at his weakness because of the nobility of his image. For example, if you saw a strong man lifting weights, you wouldn't laugh. Have you ever seen a strong man trying to open a drawer? That's very funny. And it's funny simply because there's the incongruity of this strength not being able to open a drawer. Or trying to get a cork out of a champagne bottle. That's why everybody, when they open champagne at a party, everybody looks at the man who's opening the champagne. Because they want to see, if possible, if there's any kind of contrast. Well, that's the reason then for laughter, is because man is in some way related to the divine. Now let us get into the lighter side of it and discuss humor. What is humor, and what makes anything humorous? Well, humor, I think, can be described in one word. Humor is transparency. We say, for example, if a man has no sense of humor, we say he's thick. If, however, he is a sense of humor, we say he can see through things. He will get puns, for example, points of stories. The over-serious man is he's like this. He's opaque. Can't see through it. The humorous man is like a window pane. Oh, he's like the glass on that television camera there. You can see through it. Now, who are the humorous people of the world? Well, all saints are, because they don't take anything very seriously. And that is why our blessed Lord spoke in parables. A parable is basically something very funny. For example, sunset is not a sunset. It's a revelation of the quickness of judgment. And new wine in old bottles, not to be taken seriously. That's the story of trying to put new ideas into old institutions. Sheep and goats, good and bad fish, the holy and the unholy. All parables are based upon a transparent universe. Poets see that. Poets are marvelous at seeing it. For example, Thompson. I gave you once a telecast on Thompson. Oh, you missed that, did you? Well, you should have stayed in that night. Thompson calls the sun a host, and the day a priest. And each morn the day goes to the Orient tabernacle, lifts from out it the host, raises it in benediction over the world, and then sets it in the flaming monstrance of the west. That's not taking a sunset very seriously. That's seeing the divine through it. Seeing the stars as glittering tapers lit about the day's dead sanctities. Wordsworth was walking through the forest once, and he said to a companion, "Down on your knees, man, there are violets." And even the lighter things of life. One of the reasons I like to read Chesterton is because he only took one or two things seriously. The salvation of his soul and the existence of God were about the two things that meant everything to him. And I love the story of when he met his future mother-in-law for the first time, Mrs. Boggs. And Mrs. Boggs, knowing that her future son-in-law was to come, had the house papered in a light gray color. And when Chesterton came in, Mrs. Boggs said, "How do you like the wallpaper?" And Chesterton took a crayon out of his pocket and drew along the wall the picture of his daughter Frances, whom he wanted to marry. That to him, it was light to him, and she didn't say anything, so finally he married Frances Boggs and was very happy. And it wasn't for him, no telling where he would have ended, because one day he was giving a lecture. He found himself in Liverpool, and he sent her a telegram, and he said, "I'm in Liverpool, where ought I be?" And he could write interesting poems. We won't have time to give them, but I want to give you some funny poems and examples of poets who see the funny things of life. One, Hilaire Belloc, who was a great friend of Chesterton. Hilaire Belloc wrote cautionary tales. And here is this very learned historian and literateur giving morals in a humorous way. And the story of this little cautionary tale for children is not to lie. But notice how lightly he takes it. He doesn't pound down like a heavy moralist. There's humor. And this is about Matilda. Matilda told such awful lies, it made one gasp and stretch one's eyes. Her aunt, who from her earliest youth had kept strict regard for truth, attempted to believe Matilda. The effort very nearly killed her, and would have done so had not she discovered this infirmity. For once toward the close of day, Matilda, growing tired of play, and finding she was left alone, went tiptoe to the telephone and summoned the immediate aid of London's noble fire brigade. Within an hour, the gallant band were pouring in on every hand, from Putney, Hackney, Downs, and Bow, with courage high and hearts aglow, they galloped roaring through the town. Matilda's house is burning down. Inspired by British cheers and loud, proceeding from the frenzied crowd, they ran the ladders through a score of windows on the ballroom floor, and took peculiar pains to souse the pictures up and down the house, until Matilda's aunt succeeded in showing them they weren't needed. And even then she had to pay to get the men to go away. Now it happened that a few weeks later, her aunt was off to the theater to see that interesting play, The Second Mrs. Tanqueray. She had refused to take her niece to hear this entertaining piece, a deprivation just and wise, to punish her for telling lies. That night, a fire did break out, and you should have heard Matilda shout. You should have heard her scream and bawl and throw the window up and call to people passing in the street, the rapidly increasing heat, encouraging her to obtain their confidence, but all in vain. For every time she shouted fire, they only answered, "Little liar." And therefore, when her aunt returned, Matilda and the house were burned. Then remember the prayers that were translated from the French of the little donkeys, the little animals that went into the ark, by Carmen Bernos de Gotzold. This is one on the donkey. Prayer of that poor donkey. He prays to God, and he says, "God, who made me to trudge along the road always, to carry heavy loads always, and to be beaten always, give me great courage of gentleness. And one day, let somebody understand me, that I may no longer want to weep because I can never say what I mean, and they make fun of me. Let me find a juicy thistle and make them give me time to pick it. And Lord, one day, let me find again my little brother at the Christmas crib. That's taking the world lightly. And so on. And then there is, if I have time, there is also what is called by psychologists paradoxical intention. This is where we begin to laugh at ourselves. Spiritually, this means self-examination, when we do not take ourselves too seriously. But there are some people, for example, who get very nervous when they have to meet people, their hands sweat, they get jittery. And the psychologists have developed paradoxical intention, and they will tell them to sweat just as much as you possibly can. And say to yourself, now I'm going to sweat. I never sweated before like this, but I'm going to sweat and sweat and sweat. So they can stand off and really laugh at themselves, and they give it up. There was a boy who stuttered. And so they gave him a stuttering part in a play. And he didn't stutter. He didn't stutter because he had to stutter. And really this, I don't have time to develop, but this is a spiritual exercise of laughing at ourselves. Even seeing ourselves as sinners brings on redemption. Do you know that there is one place in Scripture where God laughs? Did you know that? In fact, it's in several places, but there is one time. I have a minute and a half, do I? Yes. There is one time when God laughs. You'll find it in the second Psalm, you'll find it in the book of Proverbs, you'll find it in another one of the Psalms. I don't know whether to tell you when it is or not, where it is, or when it is. But it's this. God laughs when men say he is dead. Interesting, isn't it? God must be splitting his heavenly sides. And all of our philosophers were saying that he is dead. That could be the prelude to judgment and to hard things that wouldn't be a bit funny. And so maybe it's better for us all to realize that we wouldn't be so thirsty if we hadn't once tasted water. We wouldn't be so anxious and so distraught if we'd not already forgotten the good Lord. So let's not make God laugh. Let us laugh. I hope I make you happy and wiser. In any case, bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
We just had a kind of an interesting experience here. We were ready to start the show. The announcer had just made the announcement, and then they stopped. A man in the control room sent out the message, "The bishop has loused it up." And I did. Because there's always a little time for a commercial, and I walked out. I spoiled it, so we started again. When I was coming in to the airport the other day, there was a soldier who evidently had been away for a couple of years, and his wife was there, young wife, to meet him at the airport, and they had a very warm embrace, and he was looking over her shoulder as he embraced her, and he says, "Oh, there goes Kitty McCoy." And the wife said, "Who is she?" Oh, he said, "She was the stewardess on our flight." She said, "How did you know her name?" Oh, he says, "The names were up on the bulletin board. Pilot, co-pilot, stewardess." She said, "What was the pilot's name?" This telecast is not going to be what you think it is. I know you've heard the song, "Love is a many splendored thing," but I'm going to tell you the origin of that expression, a many splendored thing. I'm going to tell you who really wrote it, but I will tell you in a minute. It is a very interesting life because it's somewhat related to our age, in which there is a fondness for flight from consciousness. What is there, anyway, in human nature that makes it rather anxious to evade and escape consciousness and responsibility? Alcohol, dope, sleeping tablets, whatever they happen to be. A way to avoid the responsibility of being awake. And I'm going to tell you the story of a man who had a flight from consciousness. And in this story, we find revealed the unconscious influence of little things. Jean Guiton, a member of the French Academy, said that while he was a prisoner of the Nazis in Germany, one night he and a number of other prisoners amused themselves by each telling how his mother and father met. Circumstances were quite accidental. Sale of a lottery ticket, chance meeting, fall on the street, blind date, wrong address. And here, as a result of these trivial things, here were men that were prisoners under a totalitarian system. It was the little thing that influenced the life of Francis Thompson, who wrote, "Love is a many splendored thing." And what was that small thing? Well, this young man started for the priesthood, and he was told he did not have a vocation. And then he went into medicine. His fondness was literature. He used to produce as a little boy the plays of Shakespeare for his sisters. And as he was studying medicine in the University of Manchester, he roamed into every bookstore, and at that particular time there had just appeared a Life of De Quincey. He evidently had mentioned the fact that at home that he loved De Quincey. And on his 17th birthday, his mother gave him De Quincey's famous work, The Confessions of an Opium Eater. and his 17-year-old eyes fell upon this line of De Quincey. Why, at the age of 17, should I have become a prisoner and a prey to this drug, and lost my mind and my freedom? The mother never intended that her son Francis Thompson should ever follow in the steps of Thomas De Quincey. But he did. So he went in for the psychedelic, for the flight from the unconscious. And here there's a curious parallel between the life of De Quincey and the life of Thompson. De Quincey lived earlier than Thompson. When De Quincey became a dope fiend, he went to London, to Soho Square. So did Thompson. And this further parallel, when they went to Soho Square, De Quincey had in his pocket a book of English poetry, we do not know which poet it was, and a copy of the Greek dramatist Euripides. When Thompson went, he had in one pocket Blake, and in the other pocket Sophocles. When they went to London, they both went to the same place, Soho Square. How well I know it. I've spent 5 years of my life in Soho Square. Not continuously, but many, many summers and many winters during my university days. It acquired its name in the 17th century because that was the area of London where the huntsmen used to gather to chase the hounds. And the head huntsman would call the hounds with Soho. It became known as Soho Square. It's very famous. Just a block away is Greek Street. That's where Karl Marx lived for a third of his life, in great poverty. This founder of communism, his wife said, "Karl, if you had only made more capital instead of writing about it, the whole world would have been better off." I had many experiences there in Soho Square with the type of person, of course, that Thompson actually is and was. But here are the two of them, decades apart, roamed the street. Thompson made a little money here and there, chasing cabs, holding a horse, selling matches, running an errand. Just a bum. A bum. Emaciated and thin, from drug and hunger. No one was there to befriend him except a woman of the streets. And one wonders, in all of literature, if there ever was a greater tribute paid to a woman of the street than Thompson paid this woman. He wrote about her in a poem to Monica Meynell. We will tell you about the Meynells in a moment. And this is his description. Then there came past a child like thee, a spring flower, fallen from the budded coronal of spring. A spring flower, fallen from the budded coronal of spring. And through the city streets blown withering, she passed, O brave, sad, lovingest, tender thing, and of her scant pittance did she give, that I might eat and live Then fled a swift and trackless fugitive. The same thing happened to De Quincey. When he was in the depths of poverty and degradation, a woman of the streets befriended him. We know her name. Her name was Anne. St. Augustine never gave the name of the woman with whom he lived before he was converted. Thompson never gave the name of this one. But he went out and searched for her. Now, why he searched is interesting. He gathered up in dusty old, dirty papers an article and a few poems, and he sent them to Wilfred Meynell, who was the editor of Merry England. And in the letter to Wilfred Meynell, he said, "You may return the manuscript and the rejection slip to Francis Thompson, Charing Cross Post Office, general delivery." He never heard for 9 months. So in those 9 months, he went into despair. He wanted to find this woman. He could not do it. She said to him as she left, "You are always a genius. You're above me." And sinking lower and lower, he then took up his residence in Covent Garden. Covent Garden at one end in London was the Opera House. Down the street, Maiden Lane Church. You go down 2 or 3 steps to go into it. Wish we had an hour and a half. I would tell you about an interesting character that I met there. But in television, you get time in segments. And then in front of the opera was Covent Garden. Covent Garden was where all of the produce of England was brought every morning. So in those days of Thompson was born in 1859. In those days, there were 2-wheeled carts, horses, baskets, dirt, and refuse. And used to sleep under those carts, being awakened by the pounding of the horses' hoofs. And I wonder if anyone ever weary of life ever penned such lines as these. Forlorn and faint and stark, I had endured the watches of the dark and the abashless inquisition of each star. The abashless inquisition of each star. Yea, was the outcast mark of all those heavenly passers' scrutiny. Stood bound and helpless for time to shoot its barbed minutes at me. Suffered the trampling hoof of every hour in night's slow-wheeled car, until the tardy dawn, dragging me at length from under those dread wheels, and bled of strength, I awaited the inevitable last. So he decided to take his life. He'd saved up his pennies, bought enough of dope to kill himself. Under these wheels, he could see a distant clock on the spire of a church. It was that prompted him to say that time was shooting its barbed minutes at him. He took half of the dope, and he felt a hand on his that held him back from the fatal other half. He said it was the hand of Chatterton, a poet that had lived 100 years before. He gave up the attempt at suicide, and the next day, news came to him that Wilfred Meynell wanted to see him. The 9 months had passed. Now begins a kind of change of life. Wilfred Meynell attempts a cure, sends him out to the Abbey of Storrington. And here we enter into a new phase of his life. His love of children. And as he roamed about the fields of Storrington, he met a little girl whose name was Daisy Stanford. And this is what he wrote of Daisy. Here she came with a few tokens, raspberries and such things, and he said that his own heart went down to her hand. But her beauty smoothed earth's furrowed face. She gave me tokens 3, a look, a word of her winsome mouth, and a raspberry. The fairest things have fleetest end. Their scent survives their close. But the rose's scent is bitterness to him that loved the rose. We will continue in a moment. How often an adult will have an inexpressible love for a sweet child. It's unreciprocated. They do not know they're loved. And this is Thompson's pain. She went her unrepentant way. She went and left with me the pang of all the partings gone, and the partings yet to be. She left me marveling why my soul was sad, that she was glad. Had all the sadness in the sweet, and the sweetness in the sad. And then he ends. Nothing begins, nothing ends. It is not paid with moan, for we are born in others' pain and perish in our own. The love went out from his life. But then he found some solace in little Olivia Meynell. Sweet little child, but here was his life spoiled. And with the pillaring hours about to crush him, he seemed afraid of this beautiful innocence. And he wrote, I fear to love thee, sweet, because love's the ambassador of loss. Love's the ambassador of loss. White flake of childhood, clinging so to my soiled raiment, thy shy snow at tenderest touch will shrink and go. Love me not, delightful child, my heart by man's snares beguiled has grown timorous and wild. It would fear thee not at all, wert thou not so harmless, small, because thy arrows not yet dire are still unbarbed with destined fire. I fear thee more than hadst thou stood full panoplied in womanhood. And all the while, he's being haunted by something. And I told you of that poem of haunting. I gave it to you one year, The Hound of Heaven, that he wrote. He went back again to dope. The Meynell still cared for him. But this hound was pursuing him. But despite this shell, that shell that first came to the Meynells, he had no stockings on and his toes were out through his shoes and dirty old brown coat, no shirt. Consumptive, because of the nights he slept under the cartwheels of London. He still had this love that pulled him. Probably that was pulling him at the beginning of his life, and so he wrote, "O world invisible, we view thee. O world intangible, we touch thee. O world unknowable, we love thee. Turn but a stone and start a wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many splendored thing. Love's the many splendored thing, not earth love, heaven love, that Thompson saw everywhere." And haunted by that love, he went finally to his reward. And one day, well, in London, I went out to Kensal Green Cemetery. And I asked someone whom I had met in the cemetery, "Do you know where the tomb or the grave of Francis Thompson is?" No, I never heard of him. So I walked and walked. And I finally came to a slab that read, Francis Thompson, 1859, 1907. And then there came a line, an unforgettable line that drew one back to all of his loves of childhood. And that last line on the tombstone was, "Look for me in the nurseries of heaven." Love's a many splendor thing.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.
In years to come, if you're looking for me, I'll be with Francis Thompson, so look for me in the nurseries of heaven. Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs, and Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
Friends, I received a letter from Canada not very long ago in which a mother told me that her two children for a long time had been very quiet, and when they were quiet, she suspected they were up to some kind of mischief. One was a boy of 4 and the other little girl of 3. Finally, she found the boy in the attic, had on his coat and his hat, and he was carrying a suitcase. And she said, "Where's your little sister?" "She's in the suitcase." "Well, where are you going?" "We're going down to New York to visit Bishop Sheen." And this is another true story that came to me that actually happened here in New York in the family of one of the FBI agents. The little girl, aged 3 or 4, was watching her father paint a crib. "What are you doing, Daddy?" "Painting a crib." "What color?" "White." "Where did you get the paint?" "Bought it at the store." "Where did you get the brush?" "Bought it at the store, too." "Daddy, at what time does the soul come into the body?" "When the body's about ready to receive it." "Daddy, do you wear a girdle?" That's an example of how a child's mind flies from one subject to another, and shows also the result of listening to television. Late in February 1954, I gave a telecast on the death of Stalin. It was a funeral oration over the dictator. A few days later, on the 5th of March, his death was announced. We hope that what we're saying tonight will not be so prophetic. A word about the pattern of betrayal, the formula of world revolution. We're going to show the pattern by which the Soviet Union hopes to take over the world. This proceeds in 3 steps. We'll mention the 3 and then describe each of them. This first principle applies only to themselves, namely materialism. That is their philosophy of life. The second applies to themselves and to us. It is the myth of coexistence. And the third step, which applies to both Soviet Union and ourselves, is destroy with a kiss. Now, this is the formula by which they have taken over so far about 33% of the world. 37 out of 100 people in the world are subject to them according to these ideas. First, materialism. Materialism, as you know, is their philosophy of life, which believes there's nothing but matter. There's no God, no soul. Now, why these 2 denials? They're intrinsic to communism. Why no God? Well, we can understand that. The second paragraph of our Declaration of Independence states that it is a self-evident principle that the Creator has endowed man with certain unalienable rights. In other words, we have rights and liberties, like freedom of press, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, which do not come from the government, which do not come from the will of a majority, which do not come from a state, These rights and liberties come to us from God. Therefore, the state cannot take them away. That is our principle. Now, they have to deny God, because that would be another source of rights than the state or the party. In order to build up this structure of theirs in which the party is supreme, they must hold that any right or liberty which the individual possesses comes to him from the party. Therefore, the party can take the rights and liberties away. But if there was a God, then there would be rights not dependent on the party. So they have to deny God. The second principle, there is no soul. Why that? Because the soul contemplates. And when one contemplates, one establishes personal relations with a reality which is not subject to social control. In other words, no one around me in society can control my thinking and my meditation. Now, communism cannot allow that. There may be no thoughts, no conclusions, no plans, except those approved by the government. And so their procedure is, first of all, to forestall any kind of contemplation by the soul by saying that it is a sign that you're a neurasthenic. And secondly, if you have any thoughts of your own, then by purges, by persecution, by drugs, and by starvation, and by standing for hours and hours before a blazing light, your thoughts are driven and expelled out of you. There can be no soul. Otherwise, you would have a retreat into which you could enter, where you would be free from the state. That's principle number one. The next, in order to destroy, there must be the myth of coexistence. Lenin said, communism must make use of every lie, deceit, strategy in order to further world revolution. Manuilsky, addressing the Soviet Congress, repeated something from the ancients: those whom the gods destroy, they must first make blind. In other words, they must deceive them. So the communists say, let us coexist in peace, peace, peace. At the end of the 19th century, there was a great Russian writer by the name of Soloviev, who in his work, The Three Conversations, said that in the 20th century a book would be written entitled Peace and Cooperation Among All Peoples, and it would be written by a dictator who would conquer the world. Do you know of any book that has a title like that? Why coexistence? If, for example, listening to me, there's a young man and young woman in love, do you say, you, the young man, say to the young girl, let's coexist? Does a husband say to his wife, let's coexist? Unless they're fighting. New York does not say to New Jersey, let's coexist. Canada does not say to the United States, let us coexist. Why then does Russia ask for coexistence? Interesting, isn't it? Here's the answer. Here are 5 houses. House 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that's all we'll draw. Houses. In this house is Mr. A, who believes in heating his house by gas. Mr. B believes in heating his house by electricity. Mr. C, oil. Mr. D, what have I got left? Coal. I don't, in case there's some sponsors around the nation that are in his business, I want to get them all in. Now it is agreed among them that they will use different forms of heating. There's no problem of coexistence among them. But suppose someone moves into a house down here whose name is Mr. K. Mr. K. Mr. K is an arsonist. Mr. K believes in heating his house with the kindling from A, B, C, and D. Can there be that kind of coexistence? Why does he ask for coexistence? He asks that the peaceful relations that exist between nations, free-loving nations, should be applied to a nation that does not believe in peace and justice. There cannot be that kind of coexistence. It is only a sham and a snare and a delusion. Why do they ask then for coexistence? Well, the answer was given in an article that appeared in the Communist magazine of Russia in 1954, written by Leon Tivev. Leon Tivev in this article said Russia was strong when it was a question of armies, because they had more men, more arms than any other nations of the world, and the other nations of the world, and could walk over them. But now there's come the atomic bomb, and since the atomic bomb, there can be mutual destruction. Soviet Union would be destroyed, so would other nations. So there must be, Mr. Leontiev goes on to say, long periods of coexistence until the historic moment comes when we are ready to strike. And when does that come? When does that happen? Well, that happens at a moment of greatest friendship, when a dictator visits another country to pledge loyalty and fidelity. As, for example, in 1939, when a treaty was signed between the Soviet Union and Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. Now, I could just as well read this off an idiot card, but the reason I'm not reading it off an idiot card, I'm reading, so I might just as well tell you. In an idiot card, I'd have to do this. I could use a teleprompter, and then I'd have to do this. So we're reading. These are the words of Molotov. These pacts of mutual assistance strictly stipulate the inviolability of the sovereignty of the signatory nations. Note that. The inviolability, in other words, of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, 1939. And the principle of non-interference in each other's affairs. We stand for the scrupulous observance of these pacts on the basis of complete reciprocity. And we declare that all talk is nonsense about the Soviet Union trying to Sovietize the Baltic countries. That in 1939. Sovereignty of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They manage their own affairs. We will not Sovietize them. That was 1939, the moment of greatest friendship. 1940, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania were wiped off the earth as nations. Same with China. India is discovering it. Tibet is found out. In every single instance, a visit from a dictator. Some instances in Eastern Europe, long parades, visit to the operas, pledges of friendship, drinking toasts one to another, and then destroy with a kiss. Where did they learn it? Where did this formula come from? It came from Judas. Those were his stages. First, materialism. Not just avarice. We do not know anything about the avarice of Judas until the very last part of the public life of our Lord, in fact, about 10 days before. Avarice is only a consequence of other sins. It is not first. The first mention we have of the fall of Judas was when our blessed Lord announced that he came from heaven, that he would die for men, and that he would rise again from the dead and ascend into heaven and give us the bread of life. He had multiplied loaves and fishes and fed several thousand. And then the people came to make him king. And our Lord refused to be a bread king and fled into the mountains alone. And Judas said, so that's the kind of a king he is. He's interested in spirituality. He's giving himself as the bread of life. Why doesn't he be an economic king? And at that mention of the Lord giving himself as the bread of life, you find written for the first time that our Lord knew who it was who would betray him. He never believed. He was a materialist to the core. But that was for himself. Materialism is for the Soviet Union. Judas's second stage. Coexist with others. Lie. Deceive. Put on a false front. Pretend you're a friend. Never let anyone know your intentions. Talk of peace, peace, peace. Did anyone suspect Judas? Of course, our Lord did, because he is the Son of God. But I mean among men. John was the only one. And John kept it to himself. None of the other apostles knew. I think Peter was under more suspicion than Judas. Because when our Lord called Peter Satan, that's when there opened up a quarrel among them as to who would be first. The mother of James and John interceded for her sons, and after the transfiguration, the apostles quarreled as to who would be first. Even at the Last Supper, they quarreled. You say, but they knew that Judas was avaricious? Not necessarily. The night that Mary Magdalene poured ointment over the feet of our blessed Lord, all the other apostles, with the probable exception of John, joined in, saying, why could not this have been sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Remember that Judas alone did not say it. The others did not know it was he. And then in the night of the Last Supper, our blessed Lord said, he who sits at table is about to betray me. And so each asked, except John, is it I? Is it I? Is it I? Is it I? Brazen Judas. Coexistence to the end. Is it I? Peter said to John, ask the Lord who it is. Our Lord said it was the one who would dip his finger in the dish. He reached it to Judas, but the others did not know the sign. And when Judas left, they did not know the business of Judas. The other apostles thought that Judas had gone out either to distribute money to the poor under the direction of our Lord, or else to buy food for the feast.
They did not in any way suspect that he was a traitor. Deceit, friendship, pledges of cooperation, mutual assistance, love. Oh, we're brothers, all of us. And then the third stage. When you have them all fooled, then it is that our blessed Lord meets him. And Judas came down over the brook of Kedron. Excuse me for looking down. They're changing my watch. I want to find out how much time I've got. Only 1 minute left? Oh, the watch is wrong. I'm sorry. I had 2.5. I have 1 minute left. So we'll have to hurry very quickly. And Judas came down over the brook and threw his arms around the neck of our blessed Lord and blistered his lips with a kiss. And our Lord said, "Friend, wilt thou betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Oh, yes. Some things are so sacred and divine, their betrayal must always be prefaced by some mark of affection. My fellow men, my countrymen, beware, lest you say, "Wouldst thou betray America with a kiss?"
Bishop Sheen will return in just a moment.
Fulton J. Sheen, a man for all seasons. Bishop Sheen was a pioneer in Christian broadcasting. He produced thousands of radio shows and appeared on countless television programs. When he received television's Emmy Award, Bishop Sheen said, "Thank God for a good season."
As you know, all of these telecasts are given for the benefit of the poor and the sick in Asia, Africa, Oceania, and other parts of the world. It is interesting how some people make sacrifices in order to help our cause. Here's a letter that just came in. I received an invitation to attend a dinner for the Soviet dictator at the cost of $12.50 per person. Inflation or not, there are better uses for $12.50. Therefore, I am enclosing my check for $12.50 for all of the poor and the hungry of the world for whom you care, and for those behind the iron and bamboo curtains. Perhaps sometime you'd like to do without a dinner with the Soviet dictator for the sake of the poor. Would you? Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
Friends, the few minutes before television program begins are always moments of tension. There's a countdown, and one is always waiting for the cue to start. It reminds me of a woman in an Arkansas town, a very small town. She was trying to crash the society in this village, but her husband was not very social, so she kept him upstairs with instructions that he was not to come down to the tea under any circumstances. She invited in the ladies, and she was charming them at tea, and her efforts were just about crowned with success when a voice was heard from upstairs. It was the husband, and he was saying, "Ma, there are only clean towels in the bathroom. Is it all right to start one?" So we get the cue and start a television show. And this one is about America. Sometimes the Europeans make great fun of us. This really and truly happened to a friend of mine who was studying in Switzerland. And it seems this American had gone over for his first visit to Europe. And my friend in Switzerland, who was an American, said, "Well, how do you like Europe?" "Oh," he said, "I don't like anything about it." He said, "They're not up to date. They do not have the latest gadgets. The television not in the hotel rooms." And then he said, "Buildings are old." He said, "There are churches here that are over 1,000 years old." And then dirty. "I don't find anything beautiful here." My American friend said, "Well, don't you think Switzerland is beautiful?" He said, "Take away the scenery, and what have you got left?" There are so many things that we take for granted now that could not be taken for granted some years ago. For example, our next meal. When the pioneers had to go out to shoot it. Water. But now we take everything for granted. Light, heat, transportation, television, trains and planes. We take our friends for granted. Take people for granted. And we take America for granted. And there is going on at the present time a decline in patriotism. And in order to revive it, let me tell you some of the glories of America. I'm going to mention three. The first is the origin of our rights and liberties. Secondly, the great value that we put upon the human person. And then thirdly, what America's done for the world. First of all, the source of our rights and liberties. Where, for example, do I get the right of free speech here? Whence comes freedom of press, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion? There's an audience here in this studio. They are an assembly. Whence comes the right of assembly? Don't you think that our founding fathers had to ask themselves these questions? Where do our rights come from? And liberties as well. From the state? If the state gave our rights, the state could take them away. Does the federal government give us our rights and liberties? If the federal government gave us our rights and liberties, the federal government could take them away. On March the 15th, we feel it takes almost everything else away and might take away our rights and liberties. Our founding fathers had to ask themselves these questions, and they searched about for some basis and some ground of our liberties. And they looked to one theory that was being held in Europe at the time, namely that rights and liberties come from Parliament. Founding fathers rejected that. Then they considered another theory, that they come from the will of the majority. And rightly, they refused to accept that view. They wanted a country in which rights and liberties did not come from the will of the majority in an election. They wanted a country in which the majority would be the custodian of minority rights. And they finally found the source of rights and liberties, and they set it down in the second paragraph of our Declaration of Independence. It is a self-evident principle that the Creator has endowed man with certain unalienable rights, among which are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In other words, our rights come from God. And therefore no one can take them away. That's very different from any theory that might exist in a totalitarian system. This is why we call now all of our rights and liberties inalienable. The Constitution puts it unalienable, but the meaning is the same. Now, if our rights came from a party, then the party could destroy them. And so we have in our Constitution Article 9. And Article 9 of the Constitution states, when the Constitution grants rights and liberties to the citizens, it must never be assumed that the people have no other rights than those granted to them by the Constitution. In other words, simply because we have certain rights, we must never think that we have them because they're in the Constitution. No, we have them because they're divinely given. And we do not have to wait for all of our rights and liberties in the enumeration by a Bill of Rights or the Constitution. See our country as theological foundations. In other words, our Declaration of Independence is a declaration of dependence. We are independent because we are dependent on God. If we wish to keep our rights and liberties, or rather our trees, we have to keep our forest. If we wish to keep our light and heat, we must keep our sun. If we wish to keep our perfumes, we must keep our flowers. If we wish to keep our rights and liberties, we must also keep our God. Piety and patriotism go together. That's the first glory of being an American. And then there's another. And this second glory has to do with the value that our government puts upon the human person. Have you ever noticed how our Constitution begins? It begins, you see, no matter what I talk about, my angel cleans my board for me. Even though it's on the Constitution, he still works faithfully. Now here is the way our Constitution begins. We, the people, decree and ordain a Constitution. Who are people? What makes people? Persons make people. What is a person? Person is someone who answers the question, who is it? A person is one who has rights and liberties, even though he is not useful, like a baby or a sick person. But above all, a person is one who cannot be replaced. Like your mother, father, wife, husband, so forth. And a person is one who is self-determined. In other words, a person is one who has a right to go in and look at 20 pair of shoes in a shoe store and not buy a one. The determination comes from inside oneself, not from the outside. One is not pressured. Persons are not the same. Here I'm going to become technical for a moment. Persons are not the same as individuals. When you go to the store to buy oranges, you say, well, I don't like that orange. Put in another. But you can't say that about persons. A mother who has 5 children can't say, oh no, I don't like that one. Give me another one. She has it. So individuals are very often just things. Now, our Constitution states that we are made up of persons, and persons in community constitute people. This has great bearing in the politics of the world today. What's the contrast? Of what does communism speak? People? No. Masses. Who are masses? They're persons who began to be individuals, who lost all sense of responsibility, and then began to be amalgamated into a mass, and all the direction of the masses comes from outside of the persons. They are not self-determining. It's the party that determines. It's the dictator that determines. We are not masses. We are people. One can beware of anyone who speaks. Therefore, the American nation is being made up of masses. Karl Marx, who founded communism, said, the individual has no value, the person has no value, except he is a member of the Communist Party. If he's not a member of the party, he has no value. We say he has value independent of any party. I remember some years ago, Haywood Broun, the great journalist, told me of a friend of his who was a cartoonist for the Daily Worker, which was the communist daily in New York City. And this cartoonist had developed cancer and was unable to work. And he was living in great poverty. And Broun, who had a profound love of humanity, went to the Communist Party of New York and asked them if they please wouldn't do something for this man who had dedicated his whole life to them and has used his talents in drawing cartoons for their paper every day. And the party said to Broun, he doesn't exist anymore. He no longer has value for the party. Therefore, he's of no importance. We cannot help him. The greatness of America, therefore, is its belief in the value of a man. That's why we're interested in just one citizen who might be taken prisoner in another country. And where does this stem from? It stems from, after all, the Christian tradition. One wonders if really the Christian part of democracy was not grounded and founded on that day when our blessed Lord was unfurled like a wounded eagle on the cross, and he turned to a thief on the side of him and addressed him in the second person singular, saying, "This day thou shalt be with me in paradise." He called his sheep by name. Everyone had a value because he was a person and therefore bore the image and likeness of God. This is the second glory of being an American. And the third and final, though there are more, but we do not have time to develop them all, it's our relationship to the rest of the world. Look at what we have been to the world since our beginning. The very beginning of our national history was one in which the United States was a sanctuary to the persecuted peoples of the world. In other words, those who were suffering from any kind of intolerance could come to our shores. And that still is true. Just as there was a ring on the door of certain churches in the Middle Ages where a criminal was pursued by law could have recourse. If he touched that ring, he was immune from civil prosecution, threw himself upon the mercies of God and the church. And we've been that sanctuary to peoples of other lands. And then we became an arsenal. We were an arsenal in 2 world wars. And we did not gain 1 inch of territory. Nor did we ask for it. Very few instances will you find in history in which a nation took hold of the enemy immediately after the war and lifted it up. Who became the strong nations after the war? The defeated ones. Japan, Germany, Italy. We reached out a hand to them, loved our enemies, were happy when the war was over. Then we became, and this is what we are at the present moment, we are a pantry. A pantry to the world inasmuch as we are helping to feed the world. And I'm speaking not just of giving money, because that does not make many friends. I rather speak of the food that we are sending to the 2/3 of the people of the world who go to bed hungry every night. Do you not think that this is going to draw down upon us many of the blessings of God? While we find complaints, there are always complaints in any human temporal society, nevertheless, I believe really and truly that we are destined under providence to be a secondary cause for the preservation of the liberties of the world. We have indeed a task that is not easy, because the people that are being pursued by totalitarian states have to depend upon us, and Providence has asked us to succor them. We're something like Simon of Cyrene. Remember, here was this man from Africa, for Cyrene was in Africa, who one Good Friday morning stationed himself along a roadway to Calvary. He was just curious, as any man was curious about a fellow man going to death. And as he stood there, the long arm of the Roman law reached out to him. And the Roman law said to him, "Take up that cross, carry it." He did not want to do it. But he carried it. After a while, the burden became sweet and the yoke light. And so it is with America. Here, a great part of the world laboring under communism and in danger of being consumed by it is on this terrible roadway of modern politics, and Providence is laying its hand on the shoulder of America and saying, "Take up their cross, carry it." And we're carrying a nobler cross than we know, and even a nobler cross than we deserve. Yes, we're brought close to danger, that is true, and we're like the eagles, you know, that build their nests high in the crevices, always overlooking abysses. And then when the mother eagle has hatched out the young, she will push one of the young birds over the nest. And the little eagle will fall down to what must seem like certain death. And just before it crashes in the rocks below, the mother eagle swoops down and gathers up its young on its giant pinions, flies into the air, and then out from under the bird, catches it again before it falls, repeats the process until the bird has learned to fly. And so America's pushed close and close, very often to disaster. And yet Providence, somehow or other each time, is gathering us on its giant wings. As Moses said, as the eagle stirs among its young, so God stirs among the nations, and particularly our own. And that maybe is why we, in the profundity of our vocation, have chosen as our symbol not a serpent, not a lion seeking the one whom it would devour, but we've chosen as our national symbol an eagle, flying upwards and onwards to the source of all our rights and liberties, unto God.
Bishop Sheen was a pioneer in Christian broadcasting. He produced thousands of radio shows and appeared on countless television programs. When he received television's Emmy Award, Bishop Sheen said, "Thank God for a good season."
The Greeks used to speak of piety, and by piety they meant love of God, love of neighbor, and love of country. Be proud of your country, as Paul was proud, saying, "Cibus Romanus sum, I am a Roman, and so I am an American." Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.